Welcome to the Story Copywriter Podcast, the show that teaches you everything you need to know to write stories that sell and become the written voice of a business you love. With me, your host and founder of Story Copywriters, Rob Drummond. I've been on record in the past as saying that I think writing a book about you and your work is one of the best positioning tools that you can have in your business for attracting a steady stream of ideal clients. In this interview, I interview Isse Muratspahić, who is a book coach, and I think has a very distinct perspective on the importance of writing a book and writing a book from your inner self, or writing a book that reflects your core values and presents your core values out to the world. So, if you've been thinking about writing a book for a while, you're not quite sure necessarily if it's the right thing or necessarily what to write about, then I think you'll take a lot of inspiration from this call. So let's jump into the conversation. Hey, Isse, so welcome to the Story Copywriter Podcast. It's great that you're here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me, Rob.
Super. Perhaps just for the benefit of anyone listening, you could maybe explain a slice of your story that explains who you are and what you do today.
Yeah, I love your story. I was just also reading your book just before our conversation, and I'm so inspired of the level of story you can tell, right? But for sake of simplicity, so basically, I am a book coach, you can say. So, but I think the value that I give people is basically help you to get recognized as a value expert and basically find confidence in sharing your wisdoms and make a living out of it. Basically, the end result is emotional and financial freedom through a book writing process. So just short, I have a long background in the corporate world. I was working as a C-level on outsourcing HR services. And increasingly, I felt a discomfort when I entered my 30s of what I thought was anxiety, but it was more blocked creativity, right, Rob? So, I didn't have any outlet to explore the softer skills side of myself. So what happened really is that I took some more time on creative writing, and I've been working with creative stuff all my life. And what happened is that I got this question from my CEO manager that asked me, "What do you want to do?" Because we had bought a lot of companies. I had a lot of option, and I couldn't answer this question. What do you want to do? I knew my title, what I was in terms of that identity. So I took a leave of absence and I tried to explore this option. And after many years of soul searching, I ended up writing my first book, which is Now Is Your Last Chance, which is more of a spiritual kind of book, contemplation, reflection. And as a part of that process, people start reaching out, can you help me write my book? And I was digging more into the human nature, why do we tell stories? Why, what's the actual process? What's the output of actually going through a book writing journey? So this was some years ago. So what I do today is basically help guide coaches and service providers in how they can get a more clarity and basically realignment with their heart versus client versus voice, and actually how building a brand about yourself, essentially.
I think that's great. And I think this kind of realignment with your heart, I think is really foundational, because I think the risk otherwise is that you write a book that doesn't actually reflect you at your core self, or maybe your purpose. And I think it was very clear from reading your book that was kind of the first and foremost thing that you have to address.
Yeah, I think we get these. Usually it's always part mindset, part skill issue, right? So I'm not the guy that will just say like positive thinking, just have your mantra and everything will be okay, right? So every time we have a new adventure, you probably need to learn some new skills, right? Like storytelling, there is a technical part of it. But of course, you have an also emotional belief part that you actually can write that email, right? Send it. What happens when people, don't subscribe anymore? The feelings of sadness or whatever. So essentially, I think we have these polarities, like either it's just emotional or it's just that you don't have the skills. I think like usually it's more of a friction between you growing, having the, let's say, being brave enough to try versus learning the skill. So sometimes you have the skills, but you don't have the alignment with your emotional parts. But sometimes you have, you need to work more on your emotional side in terms of the skill is already there. Like in selling, typically people know how to not sell, but present the value, but they don't understand why people saying no. Like, so it's easy to say, take it personal, like, okay, so my services must suck. But there's a skill, there's a journey, there's a way how humans, digest needs and wants and desires. And I think internet is amplifying this in so many ways.
Yeah,
so it's like fire. Yeah.
Do you think that everyone has a book inside them? And it sounds from your story like you needed to take a bit of a step back from your work to first get clarity on what you were trying to say. And is that kind of process of stepping back necessary to kind of draw it out?
Yes.
Sorry,
So I think,
there was two questions there. I'm sorry.
I get it. So I think like, I think there's a difference, Rob, in withdrawing versus pausing, right? So I think we are so busy in our world, like if we don't just run, it's almost a survival mechanism because everybody else runs. So if I don't, just keep this pace, I will essentially die. I will not, it's very fear-based way of living, right? So the big thing that I at least met is like when slowing down, you get all these almost fears, like, will I be able to survive? Or so I think like to answer your question, I think we need to pause, right? And I think depending on where you're at, like how much baggage you have and how much identity you have built around other stuff, that journey can look, different for everybody. So if you have a very strong corporate identity and suddenly you want to sit in your pajamas and play guitar, shit will happen in your mind when you try to transition to that journey. So I think like, I think it's essential to have this, let's say, alignment with your inner world versus the external world. So in a way, like also when reading your book, like Simon Sinek's Find Your Why, it is great. Like I interpret like the why of being the emotional part, like the deeper sense, like why do we do it? I mean, you can 0 million reasons why you do things, maybe children, the core desire. But to tap into that desire, we need to be vulnerable and sensitive towards ourselves. And sometimes we are a bit afraid to go there because it's easier to do what and how because the external world is so much, giving you so much credit for that.
It's easier when the problems are out there rather than in here as well.
Yeah, and there's like no cheerleaders when you do inner work, right? You just sit in your cabin and you maybe cry or look on a wall or write a poem. Like nobody cares in a way. So
I'll add
like
to that
you
that
don't have a fan club.
my wife is the opposite of a cheerleader when I try to do that kind of work. So yeah.
So I think it's hard for us not to have the external validation that we are on the right track, to be honest, Rob.
Yeah.
So yeah,
very good. Something that I thought was interesting was you kind of advocate writing or having a book first process in terms of maybe thinking about your business and what your business needs to be and kind of writing the book first and going through the process of writing the book. Could you perhaps talk more about that? Because I think that's quite different to how people normally go about it.
I think you can do it in two ways. In one way, I mean, either you're thinking about starting a business, but I've started a couple of startup and businesses after my career, And it's almost like throwing a frisbee, like this is what I want to do. But if you're fast and throwing the frisbee, you really need to run and get it to come back to where you were, right? So after this was basically an insight where I saw in myself and like in my surroundings that like if you don't know what you really want to do, I mean, taking large steps is actually self-sabotaging, right?
I've definitely been on that situation.
Yeah, so what happens? Yeah, so maybe you can just tell me. I mean, what happened to me at least was like I started business with people that were not on the same page, with me. So it takes like years to get out of that type of adventure. Just, drama of selling stocks, just and the fears around running a business with people that you're not realigned with. So I think like for me, what it was like it's definitely haunting to say like write your book first, but at the same time you need to figure this thing out either how, right? So I mean, when you sit and write a book, it's not possible to write like 200 pages about a reader that you don't care about, right? So like you really need to sit down and think like, what gives me joy? And also when you sit and I mean, as you know, when you sit and write, you really know what gives you flow, right? Even if you write a book, like the whole book is not joyful. If it's a journey, maybe you need to explain why you should write and so on. But like you will notice where you find it most joyful. So basically it tells you like this is where your clients are. This is what you should do. You still need to tell the whole story, but you have your sweet spot where you can be most, at service. So I think like going through that journey, it's costly on an emotional level, right? So I think like Rob, just running away, it looks like it doesn't cost anything on you emotionally, financially, and so on, because you can try a lot of stuff simultaneously. But if I tell you need to write a book, you will be cautious. What the hell do I want to write about? So it takes both an emotional buy-in and a commitment. So I think it's the fastest way. I will not say it's simple, but it's not easy.
I had a client who once described this sort of thing as type 3 fun, where it doesn't feel fun at the time. It doesn't feel fun looking back in hindsight, but you're glad that you did it. Yeah,
exactly. So in terms of the growth you do as a person, as a brand, as a business owner, I think it's just, I have not found anything else that's comparable to the process in terms of that you actually hit all these targets at once, and also like imposter syndrome because you need to market your book, right? So I love the process of following, like writing the book. It's basically when you start, it's a self-centered act, like nobody will love me. We are almost victims. We're not experts when we start.
I think as well, like you write for yourself. You are your own first reader.
Yeah.
And that actually matters. So if you don't want to read it, then you shouldn't be writing it.
I love it.
And the fact that you want to read it means that book probably doesn't exist anywhere else, and only you can write it.
Yeah, I love the uniqueness of that. Yeah, definitely, Rob. So I think also it's like what I used to say, like you actually writing, when you start out, you're writing the book to yourself. So in a way, people ask me all the time, like, what should I write about? Like, I would like, it's honoring yourself, right? Because if you write a book, it's like saying that your life lessons and the life you have lived so far is worthy, right? It's not, I mean, okay, you will get clients, but it's worthy for you. So what you're saying is this is important enough to spend time on. Which is basically a much deeper process subconsciously than we can imagine, I guess. So usually I say like you write it to yourself, which is typically a couple of years ago, maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, where you were at, because that's where we feel most passionate and competent and teaching. So I think like write it to yourself and write something that you wish that someone else told you. So it is a unique way. So actually every book is actually giving an enhanced view of how to go through the process of storytelling or writing a book or whatever we want to write about. So I think that's very important. But I think there's also an important part in the book, in the editing, like second, third, final round, where you basically need to step back and write it to the reader, which is basically your future reader that doesn't exist. You're just in your room and, you know, writing, but you need to imagine that future reader, that you're actually helping this person, because that overlaps your energy to wanting to actually market the book, because then it's not about you, it's about helping someone else.
So you're starting off the process by looking inwards, but then you're finishing the writing process by looking outwards.
Yeah, and
in
you
terms
get
of
this,
what people are going to want.
Yeah, and it's a cycle, right? Your internal world will then, you know, mirror in the external world. And I think the experience we usually say when we feel those both is fulfillment, right? Or coherence or connection with others. So that's, I think, what gives you the joy of, like, the creativity you sat with actually created this reality, which is an extreme power. Like I can control my life, like not just control, I can create my life through my creativity. And I think that, I mean, as a business owner, I'm sure you can resonate with parts of that.
Yeah, I think so. Perhaps your book is meant to create this emotional connection first and foremost, and then deliver the message that you're trying to get across second.
I think so. I think the emotional connection would be commitment and clarity, basically, because I mean, so you need to do the buy-in. So usually, why don't everybody write a book? Like, majority of people say, I don't have time, for example, or this is something I will do later, and so on. But I think that's, like, at least for me, I mean, I was planning to write my book for 20 years. It's not disappearing. You just bury it down in your subconscious, and it's reminding you all the time, write me, tell me. So I don't know if we really choose to write a book, or if we're just born with this embedded storytelling that we must share this story. Yeah, so I guess you're right, Robbie. I think I've spent quite a lot of time in the beginning with my clients on the emotional buy-in, and doing what I call a external and internal book contract with yourself, but also with your surrounding, where you basically need to make sure that you have the space and time that's honored to do this process, including talking with your partner, with your cat, or whatever you have, because at some time it will get rough. I mean, in terms of the worldly distractions, and, you know, you get sick. And so it's really important that you have this accountability from your surrounding, that you're saying, like, yes to this also. Yeah.
Is there a kind of conflict of interest? So if you're writing as an exploratory process, in terms of if your business is kind of in quite early stages, but then ultimately you want to write a book that is focused, presumably focused on initially on you, and then focused on one ideal customer that solves one problem. How do you kind of manage that if you're both exploring who you are and what you want to present to the world, but then producing a focus book?
Yeah, I think that, at least what I see, is that it solves itself in a way, Rob, that you cannot write about something that you don't own as a wisdom, right? So I'm really cautious that people shouldn't. What's important that you get published. It doesn't, for me, it doesn't matter. With your first book, it's just going through all the stages in terms of writing the book, finalizing the book, and actually pressing publish. Because, like, there's a lot of people that write 95% of my book, like almost ready mode. And being almost ready is basically the worst, because you think that you are there, but you are not that close. I mean, there's a huge difference from almost ready and actually publishing. And then you have the marketing, which is another shift.
I was going to say, I think publishing is maybe perhaps just a milestone in the process.
Yeah, exactly. But it's huge emotional milestone in terms of, like, you know, it's like almost having an ex-partner that you don't want to let go. It's like almost a grief process, because maybe you've been thinking so many years and fantasizing how this journey will look like. And people will honor you, like maybe you thought you would write a fiction book about Harry Potter or wherever. And now I'm sitting with you and saying, but Rob, just write about what you know. I mean, write a practical book about something that you know. You can always write another book. But I think it's like almost a grief process for someone to actually do it and let go of the fantasy, what it means to be a writer. It's the same as running the business. You have the fantasy about running a business. Then when you do it, it's like just a lot of practical audit, like there's so many stuff that are just autopilot, or they're not creative at all. It's just something you need to do. To answer your question, I think like if you're just exploring, I always say like do something that's universal enough that you will still be proud of reading and feel like empathy where you're at, and leave the questions open, because I mean at the end of the day you're still gaining the growth where you are, so maybe you will not nail your perfect client, but you will definitely do it faster if you do it through the book method, because you will then need to share this book. People will ask you questions, and you will attract some people that want to work with you. And if you don't know the next level, you will be forced to take the next step. I mean, I'm sure you can recognize that in your own journey.
Yeah. I was wondering as well about speed. So what it seems to me is that it takes a bit of time to work out what you want to say in your book, but I think a lot of people have already done that thinking anyway, because they've lived their life, they've built up the experience over years, and it gets to the point where you decide to write the book, you create this kind of contract with yourself. How long should it then take, or how long could it take, I guess is perhaps another question.
Yes, so I think in a world, I mean, what takes most time is going through your fears, right? Writing is easy in terms of, I mean, you already have the wisdoms, right? So what we need to do is a create environment, or a safe space environment, where your intellectual mind, or let's say the fear-based mind, take a step back, so your creative mind can just get this content out. And then of course you have your rational mind again when you edit, because we shouldn't publish anything that just it can't just be like free writing crap. You still need to have some type of structure. So how I used to work, I have this 60-day book method, which is basically where you write 1 hour per day, 1 to 2 hours, Monday to Friday, and you do that journey for 8 weeks. And I have not had any client that's not able to do that. Then of course you have life that comes in between. You get sick, something happens. So I think around 3 months is a it's a timing that's you're able to do it on.
I've heard someone say in the past that you should be able to write it within one season of the year, and that kind of ties in with that.
Yeah, and so I think what people are thinking is that, I mean, I get it so much, like, why do we need to do it so fast? So the speed, I mean, I'm not there to force you to do it speedy. It's just like when you open this door, the creative door, you're in it, right, Rob? So when you write about storytelling, you will dream about it. It consumes your life. So it's the best way to do it is as a sprint, because the fears doesn't caught up on you, but you're still in the tension. So when people say I can write it for years, you can, but what you're doing is you're starting and stopping. So when you want to get into the book again, you need to go through all the fears again. Like, am I good enough? Is it, you get input from the outside that you start to measure your book on. So it takes some time to get back on the track where you were. So yeah. 1 season, I love it. 3 months, I think, is like,
I think that's a good target. It feels to me like the faster you're going with it, it's like having an engine that's running. The engine's much less likely to stall if it's going fast, because you're more engaged with it. If it's just ticking over, at some point the engine's going to get cold. It might stall. Very hard to get it started again.
Yeah, and then maybe maybe you have a external contract with your wife or husband, and of course, like after 8 weeks, if you don't honor yourself and follow through, your wife or husband will ask you like, but how's the book going?
Yeah.
And then maybe you're in a sad place, and
It
then you
becomes
get
a
all
point of
this.
shame as well.
Yeah, exactly. And then you get this shame, and then you maybe start to, searching for external validation, like, okay, baby, but can you give me one more week? And then you restart it and you sit with me. I was like, we cannot force this out. You need to take one step back to go in. And you get all this. I mean, I think it's almost emotional drama. Like, just follow the process, you will do all right. But I have respect for the work needed. You need to have a commitment and discipline.
Yeah. I think you mentioned in your book that it took you about 30 hours to get the material for your book together. And I think to add to that, your book is what, 94 pages or so? It's about 100 pages, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. So my latest book is about 100 pages. It's a introductory book, basically done, for established coaches, but also for aspiring authors. So I think you should aim about 100 pages, because that's also a good. I mean, you can do more, but then you need to have a really good view of your ideal client, right? So I think like 100 pages is usually good enough to hit these multiple targets, where you actually can give it away as a business card. You can use it in a marketing funnel. You can use it as a speaking gig, basically giving it speaking. And I mean, I think it's around between 30, but I have people in 40 to 60 hours write 200 pages also. So it depends also on the subject, I guess, Rob.
I really like the idea of having a sort of short introductory book that is more top level, that focuses more on your why and your purpose, and potentially that leads into a longer book if that's the journey that people want to go down. But I really like the idea of having an intro book first.
Yeah, I think it's like, but at the end of the day, was the hardest stuff. I've done Simon Sinek stuff and done it with like high level coaches and so on. So at the end of the day, the only what happened was like me sitting, reflecting about my stories, right? Because I mean, you need to gather all these stories to find the common, the trend, right? So no matter if you want to find this deeper why, you need to reflect since your childhood. Like, if money wasn't an option, what would I do? Would I play soccer? I mean, who was around when I had fun? What happened? You really need to dig into those stuff if you want to find an authentic why. So I think, like, why not just document it in a book, and you can use it as clients or prospect material as well. Yeah.
And this is one of the things I do with my clients, because I think it's easier to do in dialogue with another person than it is to sit in your own echo chamber and try to explore it by yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I had some clients come to me that's been doing this for years on their own, but that's also, some shame, or, that you don't want to share, because, and of course the objection is like, I don't believe in a structure. Like, you cannot do this in a structured way. I need to almost meditate on it. But I think what you said is really important. I mean, we grow through the connection, right? So in a way, you need to mirror me, that I'm on a rat track, and I cannot see my own blockages. So it's really good if you share 5 stories with someone, I would say like, but Rob, look, you have always written fun stories. I mean, what's happened here is that you are the story guy, and it gives you the clarity that you're on a right track. So yeah, I love it. Definitely.
I think it's good to go through with someone as well, because it reaffirms that what you're doing is worthwhile work, that it is work that is worth doing. Because otherwise, if you're just going through it by yourself, you're sitting in the coffee shop, you're ostensibly not being very productive, even though you are. And it takes, I think it's doable. I think it's doable by yourself, but I think it's harder.
Yeah, I love the expression that you need to go by yourself, but you cannot do it alone. I think in that sense. So like, the commitment needs to be towards yourself. Like, I will build this business, I will write this book, but then you will need to have this tribe that will help you through this journey. I mean, even if you look like on Joseph Campbell's The the hero's journey, you always have different level of mentors or people that awaken you up. They just push you enough.
The hero never gets there by himself. There's always helpers. And yeah. You write in your book, when you're talking about people's calling and how your book should reflect your calling, but you say in your book that you can trust you. You can trust your kind of inner voice. And it just struck me as something that was very important.
Which of it do you mean?
That your inner voice that is telling you certain things that you want to write about is normally correct, even if it's at odds with what other people are necessarily saying, or the obvious path in front of you for maybe growing your business.
Yeah, so I think a lot of things is the environment thereof. I think people will meet this resistance much more in the beginning of a journey than later on. Like now, most people I work with are coaches. I mean, they have done a journey, right? So it's not hard for me to see that work I do helps people, right? But when you're on the drawing page, or when you're just starting out, you may be in an environment that's not suitable for you, right? Like maybe you're in a corporate environment, but you want to become a painter. So I think the identity and the environment and the changes that you want to do with your true heart are way off where you're currently at. So what you need to maybe have one or two persons that you can just follow, because the more you go on this path, the more it will be your reality, right? Like for your clients or listen, I mean, there's so many that supports my mission today, but it took years to come to that place, right? Of faith, and also just following this track before the external world was mirroring what I felt inside, that this was right for me. So I think you can trust, you can trust that nobody else on this world has anything more or less than you have. They may have some material resources available, but like money, if you look on energy of money, it's useless if you don't know where you're going, right? So, I don't know how many talks I've had, people selling big company, making exits and almost going into a depression. Like, what the hell should I do? So I was like, if this were the solution, they still need to do the whole journey, even if you have money or not. But I think you get the perfect resources to create attention for you to keep going, right? So maybe having some lower funds that forces you to do some stuff that you will maybe don't do comfortably. So I think like the setup is it's like a perfect puzzle that we can only see in retrospect why it was perfect.
Yeah, indeed. Let's switch gears perhaps and talk a little bit about more of the mechanics. So how are you publishing books? Are you largely self-publishing, or do you reach out to a publishing house?
So this is up to my clients, really. So what I provide them with is a self-publishing option, also with in terms of coaching around the marketing part as well. For me, what's important is that you don't give your power away, Rob. So I think like when a client is too much, I want to pursue traditional publishing, I'm really cautious. Like, is this some ego thing that you want someone to notice you? Which I think there's benefits about doing it, but I think like if you're writing your first book and nobody knows about it, like the big publishing house, for them it's important that you have a following, right? So they don't care. So if you already have a book and have a following, it's much easier to get published, because nobody used the traditional marketing methods. Everything is online today. So to answer your question, I think like I don't have a clear like this is the way you need to publish. I think what you need to be like, move forward and make sure that you actually publish, and that journey looks differently for depending where you're at, right?
You write in your book about various ways that the book can help deliver a positive return on investment, and one of those is using the book as a marketing plan for social posts, for email, for kind of leveraging content. That really caught my attention, because that's that kind of idea of repurposing from one media to another is a lot of what I do. I wondered if you could talk more about that.
So I think like if you have been a coach or service provider for a couple of years, and you actually go into this journey for a couple of months and do this book and get help, and what you essentially get is a message that's aligned, both towards yourself. It solves all these issues in terms of what should I post, right? Because I mean, you can just take your
Because
book
you've already
and
done the
just,
work. So
yeah, you can just split it up, and then of course you need maybe to do some work on the hook and how to post it. And of course it's different if you want to make a video, but you don't need to do all this creative inspirational work from scratch, right? You can actually come on Monday morning, open your book and say like, okay, this is the topic that I would like to talk about today, and transform that to a message.
you could potentially even leverage AI to do that now.
Of course. So what I think, what takes time and money is gaining clarity. So I mean, the clarity is the most expensive part. So once you have the clarity, which is actually when you get it in the book, converting it to courses, to speaking, I mean, it's just endless. You don't need to think like, what's my offer? I mean, you have 100 offers in your book that you could potentially pursue. Is it enough to attract clients? Probably not. You'll probably need to dig deeper on the avatars for every offer, but the journey is there. The customer journey is there. And also like it forces you to understand the journey until someone gets your book, like the lead, nurture. And I think it's beautiful, like nurturing content, building trust, because you're speaking directly with the reader.
Because people aren't going to pick up your book necessarily as the very absolute first thing that they do. Perhaps if they've heard you speak at a speaking engagement, maybe, but generally there's going to be something before it. So you need to have a system almost for pushing people towards the book in the first place, maybe.
Yeah, so I think it depends. Like if we already have a call, like now, if I send you a signed book, it's almost like you owe me something. I mean, not in a bad
I'm always
sense.
sending people books, so yeah.
Yeah,
I
but not
definitely
in a
resonate with
bad
that.
sense, Rob. It reminds you about the relationship and the moment, right? And it's also a physical object that you will put in your shelf and so on. So like our shelves usually represents the things we want to do, including the books we haven't read yet. So like our whole shelf, I see when I look at my like bookshelf, I'm looking like, these are the problems that I have not really solved. At some point, I knew I had an issue. It could be a relationship book, like whatever. Like I know, but it's waiting there. I love that with book. It's waiting patiently. Like I'm here if you need me. So when you send someone a book, it's like they remind themselves about a promise they made to themselves, right? Like writing a book. So when the time is right, you are as a physical object in someone's home. I mean, what better can it be than marketing?
It's a perfect reminder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So definitely in terms of these calls, I think like if you want to get it out on your clients, typically needs to be some types of warm up. If it's a free content, maybe a challenge, or if you're doing a funnel. But of course, I mean, it depends on your offer also, Rob, of course. I mean, the better offer and transformation you have, it's easier to sell a book. I mean, potty training or doula services, or I mean, the types of book that solves a very specific problem for people that have a high desire, it's easier to sell those books than a more generalized.
And that comes back to doing the thinking and gaining clarity over who it is and what they're struggling with right now.
Yeah, and I think what's harder is to talk about return on investment if you're just starting out, or if you're having, because I mean the return on investment is basically saving years of confusion. But then again, you don't see those years. So sometimes it's hard for people to understand, like, but I'm not confused, but no, but you're still trying to find a way. And this is a way, I mean, you still need to do the thinking and writing and everything to find parts of yourself, right? So my thought is that at least at the end of the day, when you do it through this process, is you have an asset, which is a book. It's not just notes or something. You have an asset that people respect, like, wow, you did this journey, I have a book, and you can actually take the next step in your journey.
It tells people that you have something to say.
I think so. And also it shows that you have grit and perseverance enough to actually finish through on a promise, right? So it's like, if you want to work with me as a client, if I say, listen, I've written a book, it's like, okay, this person is willing to do challenging stuff and follow through and be there for me. I mean, it's something that people look up to subconsciously.
I'll add the comment that all of my clients in recent years have all read my book, every single one. So it's a great filtering mechanism, and it means that when I do get to have a pre-sales conversation, it's a night and day experience. If I'm speaking to someone who has read the book, it's always a pleasant conversation, even if we don't work together. And
so what's
I
your
value
experience?
that quite highly.
So what's your experience like? What's the energy when you get in those calls, Rob? Do you feel like do you feel valued already, or what's the experience for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, even if I've never spoken to them, it's like in some respect they feel like they know me to some degree, even though we've never spoken before. So it's a much warmer conversation. People are generally there's less resistance on price, I think. It's very rare that anyone will ask me for references or anything like that in that situation. So I think it transitions you from being a kind of vendor or a commodity to being someone that they specifically kind of want to work with you, even though there are other options potentially.
Yeah. So we just got our first child like 2 months ago, and I was speaking. Yeah, thanks, Rob. So it's so interesting. So I spoke with a friend of mine, and like in the beginning, you have all the breastfeeding and everything. So I had a friend that she was talking about. She got some breastfeeding help from this, and she used like this potty. She's used a lot of coaching. She believes in the process, and yeah, it's so funny because when she talks about it, she's like, but I worked, because it's a team of people working with potty training, and breastfeeding and help she has got. But she's like, but I got to work with the girl that wrote the book. So there was like a clear hierarchy and the pricing and everything about this coach that actually wrote a book about this method versus the 10 other coaches that work like a franchise under her. And it reflected in the pricing, in the joy of working with her. It was almost like exclusive just to get in contact with her. So what I also love, what you told me, is like, it's like essentially, if you quit your job and you made it redundant today, Rob, for example, right? So in the traditional world, you need to show me references, CV, maybe an educational background. Like, I want you to show me through hard work that you're actually eligible to do this. So what I tell people, like in 1 year from getting redundant, if you write a book, you can just shift the whole career. It's like a new life in 1 year. And nobody will ever ask you if you're competent to do it if you have written a book. Like, I have never got an actual, like, do you really know what you're talking about? Because it's like, there's a respect that you don't write a book if you don't really dig deep into this subject. So I love that for people, in their mid work life and wants to transition to something new, like doing it on a back, having a book as a going into will really make that journey much more enjoyable for you.
Yeah, I had a stint in employment about 6 years ago, and I went to that interview with a previous version of my current book, and I ended up getting the job, and my boss said, well, we had to have you because you came with a book.
Yeah, I love it.
So there we go.
I love it.
Isse, this has been great. Is there, just before we sign off, is there anything else we haven't talked about that you think is particularly important in terms of getting the ideal book out of your head and out into the world?
No, I think like I don't, because when you say write a book, people have preconceived idea what a book is about, right? So what I usually, like to ask people is like, what do you want to do? I mean, what's your dream in life? I mean, how do you want to spend your days, with whom, and so on? Like, it's an act of freedom. And then on back of that, look like, how can a book help me? Because otherwise you will always find objections why writing a book is something different than the life that, like a book should support the freedom of your life. It shouldn't be something that you just write, put in all the work. So it's so important in order to find the strength and actually to follow through on this journey. And I mean, a book is so funny because I tell people, like, people are not buying your book. They are buying dedicated time to solve a problem. Like, and in fiction, it's more entertainment. So what they are buying is basically gossiping and having an emotional reaction towards a character that I can have some distance towards. But in nonfiction, it's really clear, like, they want to solve this issue. They don't care about having coaching with me. They want to solve their problems. Then it may be joyful to talk to me because that's helping them solve the problem, but they don't really care about me. So basically, the book should be worth the dedication of time that someone has given you. And in
someone
today's
does
world,
dedicate their time to it. Like, I think we should never take that for granted, that even a short non-fiction book, someone's going to spend at least a few hours. If they're reading it completely, they're going to spend a few hours reading it. That isn't something to take for granted. And I think it's another reason to be repurposing sections of your book into social posts, into emails, so that potentially, even if they never actually get around to reading it, even if it just sits on their bookshelf reminding them, perhaps they still consume the core message in other ways.
yeah, and I love that in your book, just before we close up, Rob, is I said to people, be direct. And someone's like, yeah, but it's almost, it's like, I'm not angry. Like, being direct and angry is two different things, right? But I think it's like, be direct, because people being direct towards a reader is also telling them that I respect your time. It tells them I believe in you, and this is how you will do it. Because by being too vague, it also confuses someone that's already confused, right? So you need to help them. So, but I think some people, we are thinking that the book is about us so much. So we're like, I don't want to be direct or offend anyone. Like, you should offend people. I mean, the ones that don't have this issue shouldn't touch your book. So don't try to please everyone. We're just trying to help these people solve this issue. So it's I really love that, respecting people's time, and I think this is really important when you actually, that you need connected. It's not that I'm writing direct, usually because I want to respect your time and I want you to solve this issue as fast as possible. If not with me, with someone else. But if you spend 2 hours, you should at least gain some wisdoms and insight what your next steps are. So I think that's very important. Yeah.
And perhaps the first 2 hours that you spend should make you want to invest another 2 hours reading more, but you have to get through that first part first. And I also think that publishing is changing, where now you can publish as many books as you want. They don't have to be great big books. They can be little books that focus on a specific problem. And I think that's quite empowering, potentially.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can basically use it as a back-end offer or back of an offer on a yearly process. Like, this is a book, this is a new offer, we go out with it. So I think we shouldn't, I mean, people have different ways of publishing it and aims. So I think we should really take away the myths about books are for the inspired, depressed guy, Nietzsche
The
sitting
starving
for years.
artist.
Yeah. So I love, yeah, and I think we shouldn't really, I mean, people are really getting help through this medium.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
How can people
Okay.
find out more about your work and your book?
Yeah, so I think like the easiest way to connect with me is through either LinkedIn or just going to callingtomillions.com, which is my, going to website under the brand Calling to Millions, which is basically follow your calling, write a book and share with millions and make millions of, if that's what you desire. So it's both the emotional and financial freedom of it. So callingtomillions.com, and all the info is there to connect. And yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, we will make sure that that your LinkedIn profile and the Calling to Millions site is on the show notes.
Definitely.
Great. Well, thanks for joining me this morning, and it's been a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. I appreciate it. Thank you for all the wisdoms.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Story Copywriter podcast, you'll want to make sure you're on my email list. When you sign up at storycopywriters.com/podcast, I'll also send you my 7-day storytelling crash course free by email. Please also make sure you've got a copy of my simple story selling book, which is available from Amazon in paperback and Kindle formats. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.